Good morning, afternoon, and evening to all our viewers, and welcome to our latest Expert Talks webinar. My name is Abby, and I'm a co-development success manager at Virtuos, a leading content production company that specializes in game development and 3D art production. I'll be your moderator, and today's topic is the evolution of facial animation and facial motion capture. To walk us through this topic, we have our two expert panelists. First, we have Alex Bittner, Senior Facial Animator at NetherRealm Studios,
Hello, everyone.
and Kyle Renteria, Creative Director at Counterpunch, a Virtuos studio.
Hello.
Thank you both for being here. And for those of you watching, we will have a live Q&A session at the end of this talk. But in the meantime, here are our talking points, which we'll be going over in the next 45 minutes or so. All right, first is what attracted you to career in animation and why facial animation in particular? Next, how would you define facial animation to an industry outsider? Number 3, what is the best thing about working in animation for video games? What is the biggest technological leap you've observed in the field so far? Can you share examples of how motion capture has transformed your work and the games we play today? What is some best practices in motion capture? And in your opinion, what are the top 3 features of high quality facial animation? What's your advice to those interested in working in animation or animators looking to make the switch into the game industry? And finally, what do you see in the future of animation, at least in the next 5 years or so? So we will start by getting to know our panelists with the first question, which is what attracted you to a career in animation and why facial animation in particular? Who would like to get started?
I guess this is me. I've always had a love for video games and animation. I've been playing video games since I was 5 years old with Mario. Um, and I never really considered it as something of a career until I got to college and I actually got to take a 3D modeling class, and it just consumed me. And so I moved into animation from that, a little bit of visual effects. Ended up taking me out to California for grad school, and that was sort of the beginning of my career in animation. As far as facial animation, the thing that really, I've got a couple images up here where I'm kind of pinpointing the 2007. The game came out called Heavenly Sword, and this was the first game that really, the whole thing that grabbed me about this game was the facial animations. Um, this is the same time as early PS3, same time as like Uncharted was coming out. So I mean, it's not like there wasn't amazing animations out there, but this was specific performance capture, motion capture, facial animation, where they put a lot of effort into it, and it really showed. It was honestly probably the best looking part of the game. Um, but what really focused me on specializing on facial animation was probably my first game industry job. I was working at 2K Games on the NBA game series, doing facial animations for the like Shaq and Ernie little loading screen that they would play between games, and it was just such a blast working on bringing these characters' performances to, and I say characters, I mean like Shaq is a real person, but he is a character. He's hilarious. He's just this complete goofball, and you know, being able to bring his personality to life on this facial model was really appealing to me. And so that's what kind of started me down that whole realm of like, well, if I'm having this much fun doing this with this character, what can I do with other characters and other people? And there you go. Now it's brought me to the point where I'm at now, where I'm heading up the in-game facial animations for NetherRealm on, Mortal Kombat, and it's a blast.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. What about you, Kyle?
Cool. So, why animation and particularly why facial animation? So, for me, as a kid, I was always loving the idea of drawing. I used to draw all the time, more of by looking at something and trying to replicate it as best I could. That was a passion I had young. I also loved the idea of acting. I was loved movies as a kid, cartoons, you name it. Um, but I was always very shy. I didn't know how to really talk to people that well. It was very something I couldn't really do. And some way, somehow, I found a way to do both without being in front of the camera, and that's what I found animation in a sense. I was in high school. I was taking like computer applications classes, like back in the day when before Photoshop was really a big thing. It was like PhotoDraw and Dreamweaver and doing web design on like HTML, but like through Notepad. And I did Macromedia Flash back when before it was Adobe, so it was a good while back. And I did like my first walk cycle with like using that program in a 2D sense. And when I was working through it as for a piece, it was actually really fun and kind of got me hooked just making stuff move. It was pretty cool. And the more and more I realized what I wanted to do with the direction, I found that I loved playing games. It was something of a massive passion. I was a big Halo person. I loved Final Fantasy back in the day. The stories always gravitated to me. And the more and more I thought about my future, I realized I liked art. I loved the idea of being in stories and storytelling. That was always really fun. Um, and it kind of made sense for me to sit there and be like, you know what, I can act, but not be in the forefront, and but also be doing such a cool experience and being a part of that kind of overall storytelling um, part of a game. And it was a way to let my shy self come out without actually expressing it. And through being um, an adult, I kind of learned how to be more expressive through my own words and myself. But this allowed me to express that in a bigger way. So allowing myself to communicate ideas, emotions, feelings, was really appealing to me to do that for a job. I thought that was such a cool idea, just to say, hey, I get to get paid to do that. So that was really fun. It was really cool when I watched movies like Toy Story or even Megamind for that matter, where you sit there and you watch the the work in front of you. Even live action. There's a lot of great movies that I can't name off the top of my head because there's so many of them, but it really grasps the audience and it pulls you in. And specifically, why I chose to move forward with facial is there's so much detail and there's so much expression that you can get with doing so little. You can say so many things without actually saying words itself. So it's a very fun way to be expressive without throwing your hands around or running around and doing some cool action stunts. You can really say so many things with just this range right here. And so it was really a cool idea, and it was really fascinating to show how much you could do with just your eyes or just a small movement in your mouth that can convey such a big gesture or a big idea. And that to me was a driving force of me wanting to continue to drive that art into that acting sense.
Awesome. Thank you, Kyle. And our next question, how would you define facial animation to an industry outsider? Kyle, you want to go first?
Sure. So I kind of broke it down just in case someone doesn't know the idea of animation. Animation in general is just the replication of life through motion. We're the best way I can describe animation is the digital actor. We're the actors that are playing on the screen as if a live action would, but we're just having CG characters do the work that we're supplying the motion to. So they're the ones that are taking the stage through this medium. And facial animation specifically is dealing with the conversations and giving life to what we have in just this range here within your face, giving the expressions, the tones, the attitude, the emotions, and you're pretty much expressing all of that with only using your brows, eyes, mouth, nose, cheeks, all the things that you have on your face to kind of sell the idea of this life.
Awesome. And what's your take, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, Kyle and I are pretty much on the same page about this. It's facial animation is just specifically the animation that deals with a character's face and used to convey performance and emotion, dialogue synced to audio samples. It can be limited and stylized. You can look at, take any 2D hand drawn cartoon, all the way from like Mickey Mouse to Adventure Time. Things that were like eyes are just dots, brows are lines, the mouth is just a big amorphous shape. But you can convey so much with so little information. Then there's the complete opposite end of the spectrum where you have hyper realistic shows like just kind of to date this talk a little bit, like look at what they've been doing with like She-Hulk, for example. They want it to be as realistic as possible. The examples playing up there right now with like Mortal Kombat. I like to consider Mortal Kombat 11 kind of in between. It's definitely leaning more hyper realistic, but we push performances and shapes to a point where they're a little more exaggerated, a little more stylized, just so that we're conveying what our performance clearly. So in that sense, it has a little bit of it skews a little bit towards like a stylized approach.
And our third question, what is the best thing about working in animation for video games? Kyle?
So the best thing about working in animation for video games, there's three major points that I wanted to bring up. The first one is the evolution of animation through the industry. You look back 10, 15, 20 years, it was a completely different world of how the quality of the animation was. You go from a 2D image and now we're dealing with full 3D renders with like high volumetric like shadows and this really great atmosphere and all this motion and life and dynamics that are really making anything more realistic and more believable. It's kind of a great frontier to be a part of. And just taking every step with it and knowing that the next step in a couple more years we're going to get this, and then it allows us to do this more. Like the tech improves and the art improves because of the tech, or the creative side drives the tech to get even better. And there's just always this hand in hand that is really a fun like industry that's going in a good direction. And I think it's an awesome thing to be a part of. And we're pushing higher quality in the performances and the content of the games that are coming out, and every single year after year it seems just that the tiers just going higher and higher. Developers can tell better stories. There's more content to behold with DLCs, expansions, and just evolving of a single game can get even bigger, and there's more to say about it than just here's the first game, and then the second game some another story from some of the characters. You can take it even further and deeper. It's a really fun idea. And the fact that you can just sit back, pop in a disc, or have it download on your console or PC if you're playing PC, and just seeing your work, and you can interact with it a little bit more. That's kind of the fun part. It's one thing to view a movie that maybe be as an animator working in the film is awesome. Don't get me wrong. It's very passive, so it's great to see it on the big screen. It's really cool, but to be able to mess with it with the controller, or having a function of that in the game, kind of takes you in a little deeper, and I think that's really exciting.
Great. What about you, Alex?
Well, I personally feel the line between like feature animation and game animation at this point is more blurred now than it has ever been. If you go back 10, 20 years, you had hardware limitations, data size limitations for the disc, where things had to be, you couldn't do what movies and TV were doing as far as animation goes on a game. And fast forward to now, I mean, we put out a movie every game with ours. Mortal Kombat 9 had a full cinematic movie with it that was peppered with gameplay through the middle. Mortal Kombat X, Injustice 2, Mortal Kombat 11, same thing. You could take all of our cutscenes and just stitch them together, and you lose the fights and you lose a little bit of the context that comes from the gameplay, but you've essentially got like a 2.5 hour movie. And now in the future, games are actually starting to, it's going the other way, and games are having a little more influence in the feature realm, where you have shows like The Mandalorian that are being shot on a digital or virtual stage that's being powered by Unreal Engine. So it's one of those things where I think anyone who is games are kind of becoming this like forefront. It's just a booming and growing industry. Which kind of brings me to my next point, is that it's constantly growing. It's constantly changing. You look at, especially when you're in the middle of working on a game, it's like, here's what the last game looked like. Here's our graphical leap. Here's how our models have changed. Here's how the gameplay has changed. It's constantly growing and changing. You're not going to work on two games that are going to be the same. It's always going to be a new experience. You're always going to be learning new things. Versus, on a feature film, you have, it's like, here's my shot that I'm going to animate. And maybe there's some software updates, but, like the heart of animation hasn't changed since the 1920s. We're using computers now instead of more than hand drawing. Plenty of people are still doing hand drawing using those classic principles. But, that the fundamentals there have not changed, versus in game design, it's just always changing. Code changes, engines change, features and how you implement things change. It's always growing and evolving, and that leads to a lot of unique challenges. How are you going to compensate and achieve the quality you want versus the limitations that you have to deal with? We cutscenes and like our movie that we do is all pre-rendered out. We can animate it. There's editing and rendering passes that can happen in post and all kinds of things to kind of polish it out, and you can get that perfect shot of exactly how you want it. when you're when you're running a cinematic that plays at gameplay, it runs at real time, you have a lot more different challenges there. For example, I'll touch on this a little bit later, but having a character rig that runs off of blend shapes is a lot more memory intensive as far as happening on the game engine. So on fight line during gameplay and in a fighting game like Mortal Kombat 11, we can't use blend shapes to animate the face. We have to have a joint based system that kind of mimics the blend shapes. So there's limitations with that. And, how do you set that up and still maintain the original quality bar? Where do you make sacrifices? These are all things that you have to kind of consider while you're working in games versus on a feature film.
Next, what is the biggest technological leap you've observed in the field so far?
I'll lead this one off. Two of the things that I think have been, are just a massive leap forward over, that we've seen lately is one, facial scanning. So for anyone not familiar with this process, we will bring a model or an actor or somebody in. They sit in this chair where they're just in this dome surrounded by tons and tons of cameras, and the cameras will take three-dimensional scans of their face, of their head, and generate that into a 3D model that we can then use for the game and for animation. You can kind of see in the image here, like Mortal Kombat 9 Johnny Cage, Mortal Kombat X Johnny Cage, Mortal Kombat 11 Johnny Cage, and how the quality of the facial features and everything has improved. Mortal Kombat 11 was the first Mortal Kombat game where we've used the facial scanning. So, Johnny in that is a real person's face, a real person's head that has been, tweaked and modeled a little, adjusted a little bit to become our character. And it's just a much higher quality, more realistic version. And I mentioned, on the previous question, blend shapes. We'll use this technique to run that actor or that model through a series of facial expressions, with their mouth wide open, doing a big smile, raising their brows like they're surprised. This allows us to get accurate shapes and accurate expressions for how the brows move, how the face changes, so that we're having accurate muscle movements, which kind of brings us into the topic of facts and facial action coding system, which I think Kyle might want to has a few things to say about that.
Totally. Yeah, that's one of the things I wanted to bring up as well. What the biggest leap is, prior to the development of facts within a rig in terms of a CG character. For those of you not familiar with what rigging is, it's all of the like Alex mentioned, the blend shapes. You can have joints, anything that controls the functionality and the mobility of a character. That's all in the rigging development. And a lot of the more recent years, a lot of the rigs for facial have been driven by the fax system, which is by the facial action units, which primarily means the motions that we're creating these blend shapes from the expressions that Alex had mentioned, or targeting specific motions of the muscles and how they move and accurately move. So, the controls that we're moving around on these characters are not necessarily making phoneme shapes specifically or making a specific expression or shape. We're targeting a particular muscle on the face and isolating that into something we can toggle on and off and work with. And that allows us to get more realistic motion. And, if we're getting a brow to squeeze, we have that ability to push it in or raise the brows up or bring the nose in and have that compression and all those fun things that your face can do. And, before, when it was just joints or it was building these rigs on a phoneme-based system, you can only get so far with the expressions, but building it off how the muscles work, it really improved how much more emotion and expression and different feelings you can get and feel more real to the audience.
Yeah, there's a lot of subtle motions and things that happen, because those muscles, they're all interconnected. They extend a lot farther than you expect. And, to Kyle's point, when phoneme based, you wanted to have a character say no, you might have this just round mouth shape making that O sound, but it wouldn't take into account how your cheek muscles and how they pull and how everything shapes around through the rest of your face. So anyone who has an interest in facial animation, there's lots of great resources out there for effects and facial action units. They'll break down different expressions as far as it's like if someone's looking angry, it's using A5 20% and A14. There's a whole kind of coding system to it, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it. That you take your time and you learn it, but it's all pretty fascinating.
Yeah, to further get deeper in the idea, it's what really is helping that idea is as we're making a shape, like Alice had mentioned with like making the O shape, like how is that really created? What muscles are pulling and stretching and pushing and compressing and that actually create that shape. That's something that these rigs now have the capability of us exploring, creating that yourself, like we're molding these expressions of how it would naturally be moved based off your own face. And so getting that level of detail and that control allows us to be way more expressive and be more accurate. So when you see these expressions, these images that you're seeing on the screen are like stills of emotion, something in motion. So, thinking about how Johnny Cage is smiling, how his mouth corners are going in this direction, how the cheeks are going up, and how his brows might have a slight raise to him because you see the wrinkles in his forehead, showing some teeth. How are those teeth showing? All these things, we have the capabilities of controlling all that now, which is tenfold in my opinion.
So yeah, I think that's probably the biggest leap. But along with that, one other one I want to mention is Epic's MetaHuman rig. And that's something that they recently, within the last 2 years, I guess, have made available to everyone. And this whole facial scanning process and blend shapes and facial action units, it's not the kind of thing that's always available to a solo indie developer, or it tends to be something relegated to larger studios with the budget and the facilities for this type of equipment. The MetaHuman rig basically takes all of that and says, here you go to the masses. So now a solo developer, if they want to make a hyper realistic facial intensive story driven game, they have the tools available to do that now. They don't have to have, you don't have to throw your character behind a mask, so you don't have to worry about a face because you don't know how to rig one up or how to model one. The tools are just given to you for free use. So I think we are going to, over the next 5 years or something, we're probably going to see a huge spike in the quality of facial animation we're going to start seeing come out of indie games, and it's going to start rivaling the stuff you see out of AA and AAA studios.
And next, can you share examples of how motion capture has transformed your work and the games we play today?
Sure. For me personally, motion capture is just this amazing tool that has given us the ability to greatly increase not only the speed and the quantity of facial animations that we do, but just the quality and the detail. So in the video that's playing, for example, it's a intro line for Mortal Kombat 11 that's basically showcasing that how we took one line that we facial captured with an actor. It was then motion captured onto 4 different body animations to give us 4 different versions of that intro that we could then use throughout the game. And this was a process we did for every line, every character, and it ended up giving us over 20,000 animations for just the intros within Mortal Kombat 11, which is just a staggering number when you think about it.
Yeah, it definitely is. One thing I wanted to add to that for the speed and quantity. So as Alex mentioned, there was thousands upon thousands of lines, and that takes a long time to process those individually. Imagine hand keying every single one of those lines would take forever. Then the nice thing about motion capture and this process, if you see in the video, there's a camera reference of an actor and he has thoughts on their face or she has thoughts on their face. We have the capabilities now with through motion capture with an actor placing a camera in front of them and recording a performance, and we can take that video data and initially trace it, the best way I can describe it, and then we can transfer those point datas into poses that allows us to then get the initial solve slash retarget out from just a video source really quickly. And doing that process dramatically speeds up the production, allowing our team for one, but any team to, or a person for that matter, get through this data really quickly in a short amount of time. So we can process lines after lines after lines just with this video footage. And these dots helps with consistency. It helps us improve accuracy. So that way, when we're creating these poses and transferring that data from one motion to one shape into another on a digital character, we will get closer to the end result we're trying to get to obtain this large quantity of work.
Yeah, and you can go to the next slide. We have a couple more video examples. One of the things that I really like about using the spatial capture is that I to Kyle's point, like sure I could hand key this this particular interaction. It would take me several days to get it to the point of quality it's at right now, whereas this was probably pumped out with several other lines in under a day. It's but
Yep.
also being able to just work with a variety of actors. When I'm animating, when I'm hand keying, I keep a mirror on my desk so that I can kind of check. I can make facial expressions in it and all sorts of faces. I'm sure I look very hilarious to my wife or my coworkers, but it's I have my own facial tics and everything, and if I work in a bubble where I'm only using myself as reference, every character, every actor, unless I put a lot of mental forethought into it, is going to have similar performances because it's me coming across through that character. Whereas now with that head mounted camera and the facial capture, we can have a variety of actors. We can capture everything very quickly, and every character has a unique feel to them. Like this particular one for Sindel, honestly turned out being one of my favorite lines in the game, just based off of Larissa's performance here and just how well it translated onto the character.
You don't smell like a clone. I'm from another time, another outworld. Apparently one where I have no style.
So with these, some of the actresses and actors for this game did a really great job selling these expressions and this detail that we're seeing these characters express. We see these brows moving and a lot of these subtleties and these nice crunches and these motions, and kind of to take it back to what we talked about earlier with all these higher quality rigs and understanding how the muscles move and having the control to do those things. We can capture all that fun detail that these actors are producing on stage or through these head mount camera kind of footages that we're seeing here. And we can get a lot of that fun, asymmetry, the smiles in there, the worried brow looks, the squeezes in the eyes, the tension in the lips, all that stuff we can sell those things better, and we can make that feel more real and more unique and organic coming out from these performances.
What are some best practices in motion capture?
So one of the big ones is consistency. You want to make sure the video footage is consistent. There's a lot of aspects that we'll discuss what that really means. It helps keep the performance the same format and the same output, even if, of course, the actual animation is different. But that way we can keep the footage consistent throughout any shoot. If it's on different dates, different times, as long as that's consistent, it's very helpful. Another thing is being prepared. If you treat the motion capture, mocap shoot like if it was an actual production, like with cameras on a stage, on a set, you can get the same practices of preparation, understanding your lines, anything with rehearsals, those kind of things really do make a difference and help with the actual shoot and motion capture.
Yeah, and kind of along with what Kyle was saying with consistency, there are a lot of things you can do to basically give you the best bet with that. For instance, using a head mounted camera. You see in a couple of those examples just a helmet with a couple of bars that holds a camera out right in front of your actor's face. If you want to make sure you frame that up nice and consistent, because if it's kind of skewed, if it's sitting a little higher, a little low, that change in the angle of the actor's face on your camera footage, you got to remember it's essentially pulling information off of a 2D image in order to translate into your 3D animation and motion tracking. As long as you can keep that consistent, the tracking software and everything can kind of pull things out from that. But if it's suddenly different, if it's changed, it's like throwing a new actor in, right? You have to suddenly retrain it for the change in how they're sitting on the helmet or the new angle on their face. So you always want to try to keep that nice and straight on. Your lighting, most of these head-mounted cameras will have a light that shines directly on your actor's face to kind of give it a nice even lighting so that you don't have shadows or anything that can ultimately distort or damage the tracking. Same kind of thing with, this is something that we struggle with in our own motion capture, is harsh overhead lighting. If our actor turns their head a certain way and suddenly we get a glimpse of these overhead lights, we get a big lens flare that just destroys the tracking, and just makes that whole process of getting, good capture out of that a lot more difficult. And then you just want to keep the face clear. It's particularly, acting out certain scenes, it's very, it's kind of counterintuitive, right? Like, I know I'm sitting here talking and I'm waving my hands around and I'm putting them all in front of my face. And, that's the kind of thing you need to avoid when you have this camera out in front of you. Because if your hand comes up in the way, if you go to like grab your chin, you've suddenly covered up and obstructed all those features that the software relies on to track. And this last one it's kind of a no-brainer when you think about motion capture if you're doing a full performance capture, but is be gestural in the performance, or have your actors be gestural in the performance. If you're doing a full performance capture, it kind of goes without saying, right? They're acting out the whole scene completely. In the case of a lot of what I do, we are only capturing the face, because the body motion, NetherRealm, we like to say we have a little bit of a Frankenstein process. We have a different voice actor with a different body motion actor. With sometimes we use multiple body actors because we'll have somebody for stunts and then somebody else for face. But we'll have them in and we'll just do facial capture. We're just having them act out the lines, and sometimes people get a little too locked in and they just kind of stand there and give their performance. And that locked off kind of stance comes across in the face, right? You want to be gestural. You want to be, be on the nose. Even if it's as simple as just like taking a couple steps forward when you deliver the line, it loosens up your face in a way that you don't think about and gets a much more natural performance out of it.
To your point, I think, I've been in different shoots where I'm not mad at a Frankenstein kind of production where you're getting these different formats of getting the motions you need. Because, right, someone can be an amazing stunt actor or someone can be amazing with their body, but maybe not so their face. And having someone else who is really good at just making these really crazy expressions that just happens to hone in on the emotion or the feeling that you're trying to get, I think is very valuable, and it definitely helps the process. With this digital medium, we have a lot of freedom that live action doesn't have. Live action, the actor does what he does, and that's it. With motion capture and using it for games, we have the capabilities of piecemealing these really strong performances together to make something even better, and or something to push more through Hanky and or through another take or something else that we can produce in motion capture that can really, really make something good, amazing.
Absolutely. So to that point, here's we have a couple examples of some footage from Mortal Kombat 11. You can kind of see the final renders and everything in the lower right corner. The lower left corner has our master edit, which shows the head mounted camera footage, the blocking, and then reference images from the mocap stage. And then in the top left, we have just the raw facial solve. And then in the top right, we have the polished facial animation.
Yeah, and to some of the points we mentioned, if you look at all the different footage, the HMC videos, they're all very consistent. The framing's the same. There's similar lighting. So some of the points that Alex had made, there isn't much destruction. There's a couple of hot spots, but for the most part, it was very contained. And so that right there is a great example of keeping everything consistent, even if it's different characters, as long as the production itself is very consistent and getting this data uniformed, which I think it was very successful in getting the performances out from those footages, and you see there's like a director on stage in some of those shots you see on towards the bottom. These two actresses are working through these lines, they're saying all these things, as we mentioned before, being prepared, having the time to rehearse and getting the beats down and blocking out those motions and hitting those expressions and all those different things, all those little beats and all those preparations, and definitely helps make the performance what it is that you see at the very end, and how well of a job that has been done through these cinematics.
Yeah, and this gets even more complicated when you're dealing with a big scene with a lot of actors.
Oh yeah.
So this has in events like this, because we a lot of shoots, you're limited to the hardware of how many actors you can actually capture facial on at a time. Even with motion capture, you can only have so many people on the stage before it starts to just overload things. So for this scene in particular, it had to be broken up over 3 separate shoots in 3 separate days. And to Kyle's point, planning, we had to map out, all right, who are we going to have in this day? Who has spent the most time interacting with each other? Try to get them together in on the same day so that they're actually all there to play off of each other. If they can't be, you have your director will kind of stand there as be like, all right, here's where they are, so they know what direction they're looking and playing to. It can be, a lack of a better way to put it, a little bit of a Frankenstein process. You can also see, like, what we're talking about with the cameras, and our actors are all really good about making sure that they stay very conscious of that camera and keeping their hands out in front of it. So that's always something that has to be adjusted later by our animators. If there is something that they should be holding closer to them in a more for it to be a more natural, realistic pose, they kind of have to awkwardly hold it out and then have it brought in after the fact.
Yeah, sorry if I'm smiling too much. It's really fun to see all this stuff again, because this was such a fun production to be a part of. One of my favorites, to be honest. It's always fun seeing the beginning to end process, and the cool thing I really do like, and I think that your team did a great job, Alex, setting up, was the consistencies in actors and how they chose for the facial performances. For one, as I'm seeing current Johnny Cage and past Johnny Cage talking to each other, and then just seeing their interactions and the actors that you guys chose to hit those different feelings. You have 2 different actors that we see playing basically the same person, just at different eras of that person's life, and getting the young one, his snarky, like, I don't care about you attitude, and the other one's like, he's matured. So the more recent Johnny Cage, you can just see that fun sparks in their performances, and how well of a job that those actors were able to produce and get that motion where it needs to be, and that acting where it needed to be, to get just some funny bits.
Right. And to that point, I mean, we certainly could have, used the same actor for the past and present versions of each character. And honestly, I think in a couple instances we did, just because that person just really nailed that particular character.
Yeah.
But it kind of goes back to my point of, you know, like our actor Lawrence, who's been playing Johnny forever. He does such an amazing job. But I can pick. If we ever have him play a different character, I can pick his face out, and like he just has these unique facial tics that I've come to associate with Johnny. That if we were to have him play his younger self, they would probably feel too similar.
Yeah.
So that's where it's like giving somebody else in there to your point. It's like, they're different stages in their life. There's little subtle differences that need to happen. And it's the kind of thing where if we weren't doing facial capture, if we weren't casting different actors for these two characters, we might not, that might not come across as effectively as it does.
Exactly. Or to your point before about quality and speed, you'd have to be done hanky. And then there goes even more time.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gosh, a 10-year production trying to get just the story mode done. That would be insane.
It would be, for sure.
Question number 7. In your opinion, what are the top 3 features of high quality facial animation?
So as a funny side note, when I first was coming up with my thoughts, I actually thought about features as in feature films. So I started making notes down of different movies, and I was like, oh wait, no, just kidding. So that was a funny tidbit. But so the 3 features of high quality facial animation that I find really effective. The first one is understanding acting and performing. Again, like I mentioned earlier, that animation in general, we're the actors behind a digital puppet, the best way I can describe it. We're the ones that the audience sees, they relate to, they connect, they bring their attention. We talk to them, we talk to people on screen, we show them things. We want to ensure that everything that we're doing, that we're animating for facial, we're giving all those motions a purpose, a relative meaning of why they're doing it. Why is this person furring at this other person? Are they mad? Is it something else? Does this person hold a grudge? Are they sad? So they're showing their sadness through anger, or are they happy? Why are they happy? Everything has a meaning and a purpose. Understanding those beats and really taking in the idea of an actor will make something that's moving versus making something that's acting. And then, to me, that's a big feature for sure. The next one is understanding the muscle movements of the face. As you mentioned before, action units, the facts, all those things. At the end of the day, understanding how you're making these expressions, what happens. Not every pose that has a feeling has equal motion. Something could, if I'm doing a squeeze with my nose, what could lead that could be my squint of the eyes, then my nose goes up, then the brows move in, and there's a flow, and there's a rhythm, and there's movement, and there's overlap, and all these things play a part of what an expression gets in and out of. So that's something that's very helpful in getting something that's good quality animation to a high quality animation. And lastly, something I found big in my journey as an animator is knowing that your output is on a 2D image plane. It's not necessarily being outputted as 3D. We're working in a 3D medium for sure. We're expressing these characters in all different angles. We have the capabilities of moving them around in the 3D packages that we're using them in. But at the end of the day, it's on a 2D surface. Understanding that, and understanding that how things move and relative to how it's shown is very important. All the principles are still relative in animation that we're seeing. And if you take that idea, 3D is a struggle or 3D is too daunting, understand that it's still a 2D image that you're playing with. And whatever the camera sees is what the output is going to be. So you still have a lot of control in that sense. And that to me, once I jumped that hurdle, that my quality got even higher.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with that. This is actually a question that I struggled with when I was trying to think of it, because it's kind of hard to narrow it down to just 3.
It is.
Yeah, and admittedly, I went a little more technical on a lot of these. Before I get into them, though, I just want to jump off of what Kyle was saying about, your output, the end result is coming off of a 2D image. And yeah, that was it. Like, I had the same kind of epiphany at one point where it just, you realize, at some point you're going in there thinking, it's just got to look good from every angle because it's 3D. And at some point you realize, like, no, I need to animate to my camera, and sometimes I need to cheat things a little bit to get the best result. I think I think it was the Dragon Ball Z Fighters game, if I can spawn a kind of an example, but there's some great images where people have hacked the camera in that game, and just you skew it off to the side a little bit, and you can see how they're scaling arms and legs up and down and stretching them to like ungodly proportions, and just completely breaking their characters, the facial rigs, the body rigs, everything, in order to get that very specific anime look for the camera. And when you look at the final result, it looks perfect. But if you were to, rotate the camera 90 degrees, you would probably have this like, oh God, what is this monstrosity moment? And so, sorry, I just immediately thought of that kind of stuff because I get a kick out of it.
Totally.
But yeah, so for me, one, particularly within our like pseudo stylized, pseudo hyper realistic, facial that we use for Mortal Kombat, utilizing the 12 principles of animation, like they are always in effect. They always apply. Whether you are, you're giving yourself some nice like squash compression poses, and complementing them some big wide stretch poses. You want to anticipate, even in dialogue, before someone speaks, they might compress their mouth a little more or lick their lips or something that kind of anticipates and telegraphs that they're about to talk. Maybe they open their mouth slightly and take a little bit of a breath before they start speaking. It's all these minor details that not only like help it feel more alive, but also just more visually appealing, I guess, and more, versus, it's one thing that I think about, when people actually talk, like, you don't think about how much of your speaking is actually driven by your tongue, which is not something that people can actually see. So you can have, it's like how a ventriloquist works. You can actually say a lot without actually moving your mouth at all. So sometimes if you're going for a very hyper realistic, when that translates into a digital medium, it may come across looking like your character is not speaking or not doing anything. So you always kind of have to exaggerate things a little bit. Maybe you over enunciate a statement a little bit more, just so that it's clear that they're speaking. And because for whatever reason, our brains are just more forgiving talking to a person who's right there in front of you, when their mouth doesn't move and it's all kind of these more back of the throat sounds that are driving their speech, versus a character in a digital medium. The other thing is asymmetry. We always kind of talk about, like, those perfect golden ratio, perfectly symmetrical faces and everything. They very, very, very rarely exist in real life. So if you're trying to go, give your character a realistic feel, things don't happen perfectly symmetrically. Your eyelids don't blink at the same rate or the same speed. When you smile, you tend, people tend to favor one side of their face more than the other, where those muscles just pull a little stronger. It's the same way how people are right-handed and left-handed. It's the details that breed realism and just familiarity into your characters and your performance. So that's something I always look for in high quality animation. Like, is everything moving the same? Is everything moving evenly? Or do we get some of that asymmetry into the facial poses and just how things are moving? Are things moving at different rates? Left side of the face versus the right. And lastly, while not directly related to like facial animation, but the vocal performance, like, never underestimate the power of good VO. when you're doing when you're animating to audio. Um, there's a lot that a facial performance can do to elevate a I don't want to say bad vocal performance, but something that's just more average. But when you have that high quality VO, and again, like at NetherRealm, we are very fortunate, in our Frankenstein process has allowed us to work with just in my opinion, some of the best in the industry, as far as voice artists. And, when they give us audio that it just, again, like I'll reference back to that Sindel line that I said I liked. Just the emotion and tone that come across through the VO are immediately apparent. Like you can listen to that audio and you can just instantly picture, the attitude in the face of that performance. And when you have that, our actors can pick up on that and then they just run with it and it elevates it to a whole new level. And the end result just sings, basically. So yeah, that's something that, it's while not required, but if you can get high quality VO, really good vocal performances, it just has this way of multiplying the quality of your animations and just elevating the whole.
Moving on, what's your advice to those interested in working in animation or animators looking to make the switch into the games industry?
The advice I would give in the animation world is the top two are kind of on the same boat, is passion about the craft. It's I wake up every day and the fact that I could act and help others act and have that fun with it is really a blessing. I sit and watch movies, I stare at people's mouth movements, people's actions, why they chose to turn this way versus that way, why they looked like this and that, to a point where I think my wife is like, I can't look at you anymore. You keep staring at my face way too much, in a way where I'm staring at her brows and how she's moving them. But it's just something I'm always observing and loving. And so to do that for work is a great thing. So I think if you're interested in animation, that love will definitely help you be in the right place, and along with that is patience, because the craft itself, again, you think about an actor in live action, they just move and they make their expressions and it's all great. But as animators, we have to make it understood and believable that these motions are real, that they're not just moving or translating or rotating and things like that. They're actually living and making these things move. And the weight is there and the nuances and the feeling is all constructed through this, basically lines and colors, if you really think about it. With these digital puppets, having that patience to get all that working just right is a big thing. And again, seeing yourself as that actor, wanting to move and express that is a good thing. Collaboration. I've worked with many coworkers, many clients, where we're part of a big team. We're communicating, we're talking, we're discussing, we're brainstorming, we're ironing out details, we're figuring out problems. That's a big deal what we do. And, willing to learn all the time. I've been doing this professionally since 2011, a little under 2010, but basically since 2011. And I still have so much to learn. I've seen a lot of things, I've done a lot of things, but there's still a lot more that I haven't experienced. And so understanding that, there's always something else you can learn is a great way to look at it. And for animation, just love of stories, the capabilities of being able to sit down and understand what's happening to these characters, why are these characters doing these things, why is that relevant to where they're going, what's their problems, how do they resolve it. All those things can really make it really fun, and to really explore those reasons why people do things is really, really awesome.
Thank you, Kyle. And what's your advice, Alex?
Kyle kind of nailed it, but it just to reiterate the point, you gotta love this stuff, right? I mean, there's a fair share of repetition. There bits that are tedious. You'll find yourself doing the same thing over and over again. There's a there's a there was a GDC talk several years ago, where somebody pulled up a clip from BioShock, and she played through about a second of it, and then she rewound it, and then she played it again and rewound it back and played it forwards, played it backwards. And then, basically just kind of stopped and was like, that was 10 seconds. Imagine doing that for 8 hours. So, you just gotta, if this isn't something that you're truly passionate about, that can really start to weigh on you, and you'll want to start to, you may find yourself wanting to do something else or experiencing burnout. And, there's ways that you gotta, find yourself to keep yourself engaged in the craft. And second, I would just say you need to be open to expanding your experience. I remember back when I was in school, the first class I had that was specifically related to game animation, to games in general. Our teacher kind of went around the room and asked everyone, like, all right, what do you want to do? And I want to be a modeler. No, you're a game developer. Well, I'm an animator. No, you're a game developer. It's once you kind of get involved in games, you kind of have to stop thinking of yourself as, your little compartmentalized world. Like I am primarily an animator. I'm primarily a facial animator. That's my specialty. But I still work in the game engine. I implement, test out tools. I do rig development. All these things that when I was in school, I had this kind of grand image of like, I'm just going to sit down and I'm just going to animate, and I'm going to pass off these scenes, when they're done, and they're going to be perfect and flawless, and I'm going to move on to the next one, and that's the end of it. But that's not how it works, right? There's so much more involved, particularly in game development, where if you take any small part of it, you're a game developer, and you will find yourself expanding into and getting your hands in all these different parts of it. So you just got to be willing and open to learning and being involved. Don't ever close yourself off and just think to yourself like, well, that's not my job, that's not my territory. If it's something whether it's something that interests you, or if it's something that just needs to be done, always be willing to kind of jump on it and learn something new.
And on to our final talking point. What do you see in the future of animation, at least in the next 5 years or so?
Yeah, so the interesting thing about the future, and I think in the next 5 years, the way I see the trends and how consoles are going, how PCs are currently are, is the capabilities of removing a disc and having a cloud solution, or having a solution for a game that doesn't have a limit of how big it can be. With, like I mentioned earlier on, with downloadable content expansions and all those other things that can expand a game, the games are going to be bigger. That needs way more content. It needs more things to fill. And that allows more stories to be told, more development, more time to allow these characters to evolve and express and to relate and to connect and do all these little moments and events that build a story to even be grander than they ever could be before. And I think that's where I see the animation going in the next 5 years. Because 5 years previously, games were great. Look how they are now. And then I just can't imagine how bigger they're going to get. The text getting better, that pushes the art, like I mentioned previously. Even just going through over time, or just for facial, it's jumped bounds. And I can't imagine what the next batch of the next development is going to be, with these newer production styles of real-time development and the capabilities of solving things in real time, where you can get motion in your face moving instantaneously, and how that's developing and getting better. We're getting more realism. The quality is just getting more and more believable. We're connecting better with these characters. It's going to get even better, especially with, like Alex mentioned, the metahuman characters. That is a massive leap that's going to just get even more pushed in the next 5 years. We're going to have higher detail and the ability to people to be really more engaged in this platform, that you have the abilities to play through these characters, and that allows you to add another level of yourself into this story. And I think with that, the animation is just going to tie people in more.
Yeah, and from a tech side of things, it's the sky's the limit, right? I mean, you think about how much things have changed already. I back on when I first was saying the first game that stood out to me as something specifically for the facial animations was Heavenly Sword. That game was studio was Ninja Theory. They were working with Weta and Andy Serkis, and there's some great behind the scenes footage out online. I encourage people to go look it up on YouTube. But you know, that was before we were even using head mounted cameras. They were actually taking the time to put actual tracking markers on people's faces. And so, I'd love to talk to an animator who worked on that and see how all that worked. But we've migrated to the cameras because it gives us a much higher detail. And what you're seeing on the screen right now is some technology that is looking to take that whole idea of facial scanning and compartmentalize it into a head-mounted camera system. So what this is doing is it's not taking a video, it's not tracking off of a 2D image like we currently do. It's actually capturing 3D scans and creating a 3D model of that actor's face in each expression for every frame that it's capturing. So this is a really amazing kind of tech demo kind of thing. As far as, it may be something that works really great for TV and film right away. When you have a particular actor and you want their face and, you can throw that helmet on them and get a highly accurate capture of them. For games though, I think we're still probably a few years out of being able to take that and translate it onto a control rig that an animator can still work with. Or even just a character that is not specifically that actor, right? Like in Mortal Kombat, we had characters like the Collector, Devora, Shao Kahn that all have these like creature faces. We still perform facial capture for them, and in the current process, it works great. We get all those little nuances and everything, but it's not a human face, right? So this is one of those things where it has a lot of potential of where it could potentially go in a few years. But it's just how we'll be able to kind of apply that into game setting. And there's other things to consider too. Like we have audio solve facial animation, where rather than using video capture, it's using the wave file and we'll just generate off of a preset library. This works really great when you need something kind of quick and dirty, but you don't get that acting nuance that you normally get from the actual facial capture. But they could be potentially be something that is applied to like tongues and tongue animation, just for helping with dialogue. Right now, tongues are something that is always hand keyed. There's no real solid way to track that off of a video because you don't see it the whole time. But I think you're just going to end up seeing in general, like these technologies are going to grow. People are going to find ways to apply them, and you're just going to see more games reaching that higher bar and that higher quality of facial animation because it's going to become more accessible to people, right? And you'll start seeing fewer games where characters are not facial animated at all, where you just have dialogue at the bottom of the screen, or it's just playing audio over a blank face, or my personal favorite, like where it's just a Muppet mouth, just kind of for when they're talking. Those are something where I think it's going to go away, right? Because it's just going to become something that people are going to see as not acceptable anymore.
NPCs are going to show a higher quality of work when before you're like, I don't want to look at these guys. Now you're going to run around in a game staring at all these people, or like in the background, like cleaning a window, and you're like, what is this face doing? I don't know. And you're just spending your time like doing that stuff versus the actual missions that you're designed to do.
I'm glad to know I'm not the only person who like runs around in games and kind of makes notes of all the spots where, it's one of those things where, if you're really into this kind of stuff, like there are games where, and again, there's limitations, right, that they're having to work around. There's lots of games that have just amazing, the highest quality facial animation. And then you get to a part of the game where, you know, they had to make the hard choice of, we have to save some memory space for the disc, or, you know, this is a character that shows up in the background only one time. We're not going to invest the days of work to get this rigged up to that high quality bar, and they're just not animated to the same level of quality. And yeah, I do run around in games and look and make notes of all those things, because it's just something that stands out to me now at this point. You know, it's sometimes you just can't turn it off. This other video here, this is another thing that I think we're going to see this is a prototype demo from Meta, actually, for their avatar system that they're working on. What's really impressive about this is all real-time facial capture. So it's running off of the headset. It's going straight onto the model. It's solving in real time. It's not being touched by an animator. You know, and again, it's not perfect. It's missing a lot of those nuanced details, but it's also convincing. You know, it's functional, which is something that I can't really say for a lot of real-time solving at present. So as more time, more money gets invested into this, you know, if this is what we can do in a real-time solve with this software, with their technology, imagine what we could do in something that we actually have somebody tracking through. It's running through artist hands. You know, and if the end goal would be to get to the point where the base animation is taken care of as part of the motion capture, right? And then it's up to our artists at that point to do what artists do best, and, you know, add the nuances, exaggerate the inflections, add the, you know, apply the 12 principles to it to elevate the performance to something new.
Yeah, this is something you can easily say, as we talked about before, all those thousands of lines in MK11 that took, you know, a good amount of time, but even as efficient as the teams were to produce that data, it was, you know, took a couple months, you know, to get all that, you know, months and months and months of work. Whereas if you started off with something like this, you can have those lines done, and that's like 80% there. So what takes months could take a month and a half for having a big enough team to process all that data, and you already have a great starting point. So then imagine that much work just even more and more condensed to where then it allows you more opportunities to make things even bigger. We're even, you know, making even more stories and more time for the other parts of the game, that we don't have to spend so much time on the stuff that's there. And all you people who pass all those fun moments, makes me a little sad because there's great moments that you see in the intros, but now you can spend more time where people are really focusing on and getting connected with those characters.
All right, we've come to the end of our talking points for this very interesting topic. I hope you found it as insightful as I have. Now it's time for our live Q&A session. The chat is open for questions, and one of our moderators behind the scenes will be selecting some for our panelists to answer. If you'd like to direct your question to any specific panelist, please mention their names. Otherwise, we'll just go around the room. So what do we got? First question. This is from Mosul from Twitch. Is there a difference between the methods used to develop facial animations for standalone games and those for the metaverse?
Well, chime in. Ultimately, I wouldn't think so. There's probably some, you know, little black box, you know, in metaverses software where they're kind of doing. But I mean, this real-time tracking like they were using in that video, I mean, that's something that has existed. It's been used for the past several years in, you know, for TV, and just to kind of give I'm trying to think of a specific example. I know they use it on like a lot of late night shows, like Colbert uses it for some things just to get basic kind of mouth flap movements. There was a whole episode of The Simpsons that ended with a live Q&A session with Homer that was basically done the same way. So the core of that technology is ultimately the same, but how it's getting applied or what sort of detail work they add in the code from a tech standpoint, it might start differentiating a little bit. But I don't see why either one couldn't be applied to the other.
Yeah, they're definitely very similar approaches. Metaverse can use something like a live solution. Most standalone games use a process that takes the work from a video source that we were showing in the examples and processing it, doing some touch-up work and some polished details that an animator would do to get it to where it needs to be. Metaverse can also do the same thing. Just depends on the solution that each of them use.
Cool. Interesting. Thank you for that. All right, what is next? Hold on. Looking for the next question. Yeah. Waiting for the next question. Mm-hmm. You have to say, okay, so we have a question. It's coming in through my, so bear with me here. So the question is, in a game like Mortal Kombat 11, what was it? In terms of facial animations, were they all done using hand key or mainly motion capture? Yeah, and this was from LinkedIn. Yeah.
So yeah, I'll take that one. We use a combination of both. So for the story mode, for our render cutscenes, and for the intro dialogues, those are all motion captured. The only time we ever would hand key some of those are combat scenes, for example, would be an exception. It just, with the stunt actors and everything that we use when we're shooting mocap, having that camera on their head in front of them, it's just not a feasible process. There's too much movement around for the camera to remain stable. It also gets in their way and limits them. So it's more used for the performance scenes. And then for the intro lines, like we were talking about before, it's the best way for us to get through the high volume of animations that we need to generate. As far as on the other end side of in-game, the flashier intro cinematics, not the dialogues, but the character showing off how awesome they are before the fight starts, the victories, fatalities, all that kind of stuff, that's all hand keyed by us.
Cool. All right. So, okay, we have another one from AM to DM from Twitch. What are some specific things to look out for in an actor while casting for mocap?
So I can start on this one. So I unfortunately am not a part of the casting department, but I do see what comes out of that stage and what some of the talent looks like. Some good things to look at is a good sense of memory. That's a big key. Understanding your lines, making sure that they know exactly what they need to say for the time of the shoot. Another thing is understanding tone and pitches. When is it a good time to hit certain emotions that are higher pitched versus lower pitched, and understanding emotion and understanding the context of what you're going to be saying for that particular shoot. Is this character coming in today that's going to be angry with this other person the whole time? If they're going to shift their emotional intent. A good actor who can take that and run with it is a good example of someone who would be great for this kind of area of mocap, because mocap is a tool, and so when I look at actors who do mocap or actors who do film or TV or it doesn't matter, they're all still actors to some level. It's just how the format is really what's really different. So when they come on stage to do mocap, they're still trying to express their emotional intent for the character or their emotions, what they need to get from A to B, depends on what it needs for the day. So someone who understands acting but full-heartedly and can deliver a line that makes you feel is a big key.
Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback off of that, I mean, I agree. If you get you want to get a good actor, right? And if as long as your actor understands what they're doing and what the goal is, you're going to be fine. Our intros versus the cinematics for story mode are two kind of different beasts. In story mode, we have, the scene is scripted, it's paced out. There's close-ups and time for them to have those subtle acting details for them to do what they do best. When we do an intro, you have 3 seconds to get the point across and while giving the line. So it tends to be a little more on the nose as far as the acting goes. And we joke a lot with our actors when we're shooting faceover. They have to unlearn a lot of the good acting techniques and kind of, hit the point a little more directly. But we work with a lot of really talented people, and they understand how to make that switch to get what they need to get the line.
Awesome. Amazing. Thank you. Next question from LinkedIn, DeMille Hunt. I'm very familiar with retargeting and motion capture cleanup with full body in Motion Builder. But if I wanted to experiment with facial animation using mocap, are there tools available without spending a lot of money for a head-mounted camera?
So I have some thoughts on that. And this may sound kind of silly, but what I've done in the past is I actually bought a head-mounted rest for a phone and placed it in front of my face. And because the format is very similar to the head-mounted camera format, the HMCs, I've used that as a really quick solution to get something really fast. So, yes, the thing I found it's unfortunate is there's a lot of shaking it does, but, they have a couple of them that are decent that, and they're pretty cheap. You can probably get one for under $20 on Amazon or anything like that. But getting something like that allows you to kind of play with getting footage really quickly. And that's a kind of a good starting point that I found.
Yeah, as far as software goes, I'm not sure. I want to say I think Faceware offers a sort of a demo trial that you can get your hands on, like a student version almost. They didn't used to. I want to say they do now, but I very much could be wrong about that, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, you can start diving into this stuff with just a webcam like we're using now. When I first started working on the NBA games at 2K, a lot of the footage we got for the basketball players was exactly like what you're seeing right here. They would set up a camera on a desk and have them sit down and kind of deliver the line towards the camera. Now, there's a lot of challenges to working like that we don't, why we don't work like that preferably. For example, I can turn my head, and the more I turn my head, the more it kind of distorts and you lose that facial information. But there are softwares out there too, at the same way, where they will actually take that and give you some head motion tracking as well. So there's a lot of really good stuff out there where you wouldn't have to spend a ton of money. You can work with the tools you have. Honestly, I think the hardest thing to get your hands on is just the actual tracking software at this point.
Cool. All right, we have 2 questions now from Smithy1967 on Twitch. First question is these days, how much cleanup is needed in mocap data? It used to be an essential lengthy process. Is AI involved in this these days? So that's the first question. So maybe we'll tackle that first.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's always cleanup in mocap. Even if we were to get to the point with that, for example, that metaverse real-time tracking that they had, it looked relatively clean, but it lacked a lot of the minor details that we look for, at least in the high quality animation that we strive to put out. everything that we're moving is basically trying to minimize that cleanup. But it still can be a pretty lengthy process. And I think it just depends on the data you have to work with, right? There's all sorts of things that can affect the quality of your tracking and your video when you're shooting. If you get lens flare off of the lights, if the lighting's too harsh, or just camera shake in general, or like we talked about, if something comes up and obscures the face for a moment. Software is getting better with and AI is a huge part of that as far as latest iterations of it. If the hand comes up and blocks the face partially, normally that would destroy your tracking for the rest of that shot. You would have to go in and kind of hit the point and fix it, and then hope it kind of recorrects itself afterwards. Now with AI, it can kind of correct itself afterwards, and you just have to really fix the tracking for the part where the hand is gone. And even that, they're working on improving and getting that better and better.
That's awesome. Was there anything you wanted to add, Kyle, or should we move on to that second question?
I pretty much nailed it up.
Amazing. Yeah. The AI stuff is pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. The second question there was, what do you see as some future advances in mocap technology and improved realism and productivity efficiencies? Suppose, yeah, good segue from that AI bit.
I guess just to keep going. I mean, some of the things that I would like to see, one of the things we're always kind of looking for is tracking more specific points on the face to get us those details as part of the tracking. Right now, the basic points that tend to be tracked in solving are your brows, your eyes, in the general mouth shape, maybe the jaw, or your nostrils. There'll be some kind of notes that will kind of track as far as like your nose flare and how that kind of moves up. Some tracking will start to get points on your cheeks and start to get how those move, so you can solve those in there. You can retarget, or you can train a retargeting software to include that, but it's basing it off of the limited data that it has. So, for example, if we're animating a puckered shape, we're working off of a 2D image. It doesn't have the best sense of depth. So it knows that the mouth shape is getting smaller and rounder, but it doesn't necessarily know that the lips are pushing and pursing out. But when we retarget, we basically pose the model or the rig in Maya, and we'll tell it, like, when it does this, it's doing, this is what's happening. And eventually the software starts to figure that out. So the next time the mouth shape gets smaller and rounder like that, it knows that the lips are pushing out. Where you run into trouble is, if the mouth is just getting smaller, for example, it's not necessarily pursing out, then you have to kind of retrain the software that that's not happening. So the more detail we can kind of get in those tracking, part of that is some tracking cameras now, head-mounted cameras, will be stereoscopic cameras. There'll be a portrait view, and then there'll be a profile view that gives that sense of depth, so that it has more information to work with. That Meta headset, I think, has 7 cameras on it that are all trained on specific spots to get those specific details. So that's kind of where I see the future advances going, is just getting the more detail we can get out of the tracking and into the actual solve to give us that base information. That's the less time we have to spend putting in those little nuances and things ourselves, to where we can then just worry about enhancing them.
Yeah, agreed. And to kind of help further make Alex's points, is the one thing about the technology side of improving the tracking. Alongside with that, we also have these developments in these characters and rigs as the industry is evolving and the engines are getting better that can handle more detail, more realism. It allows to take that data and really apply it to a character that gives you all those little details as well. It's they're like hand in hand. So like the tech starts increasing, so does the art, and then it allows them to unlock like a new level to some way, to where we can then start applying another tier of quality that we didn't have 5 years before, 10 years before, that we can then take those two different elements and get further. So I definitely see the future with the more of these tech things are being more evolved, and having these tracking solutions that can pick up more details and having these rigs that can accept that detail and to really showcase it. It really allows the animators to take that information with their own understanding and merge them together to get a really nice further depth realism to what we're seeing on screen in the game, and in cutscenes for that matter. So I could definitely see another level of like cinematics looking great, and then at one point the gameplay animations are going to be getting even higher with these advancements.
Make them a little bit more seamless, like on par.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I mean, I would also, there's, facial tracking is not the only way to get facial solving. There are audio solves that a lot of companies do, and it takes the waveform audio and a software that's trained to know like this sound is generally this type of shape, and those have their own limitations. You can kind of train a little bit of performance into it, but a lot of them, for the most part, are it'll come like by default it'll come across a little flat as far as a performance goes. But one nice thing that audio solving gets you that we don't get off of facial tracking is tongue animation. Right now, currently, animating the tongue when a character is talking, we're doing that purely by hand. And kind of getting tongue tracking off of a facial solve is kind of a dream. It's one less thing or one more thing to get you that little bit of detail, so you spend less time doing it and more time, enhancing it. But if maybe someday we'll start seeing where facial tracking will also use a little bit of audio solving to give you that layer on the tongue animating through, and it's just it's improved efficiency by giving you more information on your base layer so that you can just worry about getting the final product that you want.
Yeah, the one small thing to add to that is my hopeful goal is seeing with this technology happening and this additional, if we can add tone, great. If we can add more details, awesome. You think about it as an actor and you're acting something out, you're just doing it. It's natural. Us as animators, we have to actually create every little motion to make it feel believable. Now, if we can take all that and have help to get the tech to support us with our guidance to get 80% of it there, then the 20% is just the fun part. You get to enjoy making it even better and to push it, to make it more expressive, to kind of go beyond what reality is. And I think that's where we're headed.
Cool. Very interesting. All right. Okay. 2 more questions. From Calypti Anim on Twitch. First question. What do you think gives you better results? Traditional facial tracking with markers or video retargeting like faceware tech? That is the first question.
So you want to lead this one off, Kyle? Or
yeah, traditional facial tracking with markers.
Like, I personally, I don't have a lot of experience working with facial tracking with markers. I do know, I've referenced Heavenly Sword as being one of the things that really stood out to me initially as, having this really impressive facial animation for the time. And I do know through watching their behind the scenes footage that was how they did their motion capture. And honestly, I would love to talk to an animator from Ninja Theory who worked on that to know how that worked. Because it just seems to me, I know through motion capture, sometimes markers drop. And I can imagine that just happens more when they're on your face and your actor's moving around. And so it's one of those things where I could see that it may have worked amazing, or it may have given them hardly anything to work with. And it's one of the things I wonder about, because, video retargeting like faceware, that's kind of become the standard now. I think that's used far more commonly than sticking these markers all over your actor's face. And part of that, I'm sure, is just, that's just a hindrance and something to your actors that they have to deal with. It could mute their performances. I'm sure you're just constantly aware of every single marker on there. So I think, it's enough of a thing having this helmet and this camera out in front of your face, but having 60 little dots all over your face, that are kind of balled up and pointing out, so, I mean, my personal thing is, I think video retargeting is probably the way to go, just because that seems to be where everyone has moved to, and I think it's less cumbersome on your actor that you're using. But I unfortunately, that's just what I have the most experience with as well. I've never had the opportunity to try tracking with markers on the face.
Yeah, I'm on the same boat. I completely agreed. The one thing that I feel that it is a little tricky with those markers on the face, if it's actual markers or dots that are placed, consistency is a big thing. And there's, if you're shooting one day and then a month from now, that same person comes in, getting that exact same spot of those markers is hard. And I've worked with footage that have markers and footage without, and I've worked in shoots that were consistent with actors in multiple different time frames, weeks at a time, months at a time, and getting those consistencies. That's a big thing that we talk about. And we mentioned earlier about having consistency, and that's something I would think that would be a hard step to continually trying to make sure that's in a good place with traditional like facial tracking markers. So, something with a video solution like Face where, you can have markers or without. So you can have that option of both.
Interesting. And I believe this is our last question, which is part 2 of that. You mentioned the importance of accurate muscle movement in the face. How do you feel about auto rigging tools? Are they accurate, or do they take too much nuance control away from the rig?
That is a good question. So with that, I've used a couple of tools that support different aspects of muscles. So I found it's an addition. You can always add a tool and run it to see what it gives you and then modify it later. So I always found it as a helpful solution of getting something that feels more natural. There are some cases, and it also will help you point out things that maybe you animated that weren't working. That's why it's so important of understanding how the muscles flow, because you can have a new shape created a certain way. That's how it should be, how your muscles are driven. But if you use the wrong control that looks very similar to something how you would use, and then you run a script that's supposed to articulate the muscles correctly, and then you see it's using something wrong and it gives you something else, it's going to look weird. So it also helps you kind of cross-check your motions. So I found it in a helpful place.
Yeah, I mean, I think it also it depends on what your end goal is, right? If you're trying to use an auto rigger on a cartoony style character and you're going for a more stylized animation, auto riggers are great. It gives you kind of the base movement that are there. And, there are some fantastic auto riggers out there that will give you every little ounce of control that you could ever possibly want. There are also ones that are a little more limited, and you just get kind of basic shapes and basic movement. So it depends a little bit on the auto rigger. Where I'm a little more skeptical is if you're going for that hyper realistic, as long as you have the scans and like those blend shapes, an auto rigger should be able to kind of put together, if that's what it's built for. If it's built to take, blend shapes that are based off of real muscle movements and real action units, and put them together in the face, give you controls that use those, it'll probably work just fine. And it also depends on the rig that it puts it out at the end, right? Like I'm been fortunate enough that, the team we have at NetherRealm and the rigs that they've developed for us as far as facial controls go are just out of this world. They're some of the best I've ever worked with. And just to give them a pat on the back. And they give me everything from the broad strokes that I need to the tiniest little adjustments that I need to cheat in there just to kind of get exactly what I'm looking for. I've never personally used an auto rigger that has given me that level of detail. But I have used auto riggers and they've done exactly what I need them to do. So it's, as far as accurate, it's kind of a hard question to ask, or a hard question to answer, because it really just depends on what rigger you're looking for, what rigger you're using, but also just what end result you want to get.
Awesome. Interesting. All right. I think that was the last one. So we have now come to the end of today's webinar. Thank you so much, Kyle and Alex, for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us.
No problem. Glad to be here and hope you all enjoyed and learned something fun.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. I hope everyone enjoyed our ramblings.
Yeah.
And of course, thanks to our wonderful audience for your questions and for joining us today. We will be sharing this webinar on our social channels for you to share or rewatch, so stay tuned for that. Thanks again, everyone, and we will see you again at our next Expert Talks webinar. Bye, everyone.